The bell had just finished its evening cry when she fell to her knees on the frozen church steps, the sound still trembling in the air like something sacred that had lost its way. The street was empty except for the wind and the few faces that had already turned aside, pretending they hadn't seen a woman weeping where prayers were supposed to begin. Her dress was thin, hemmed dark with mud, shawl pulled tight around her shoulders, though the cold had already found its way in. She covered her face with her hands, not to hide the tears but the shame, the kind that burns deeper than frostbite. The door behind her was locked, light spilling faintly through the cracks, and she had knocked until her knuckles split. "Not tonight," the pastor's wife had said through the wood. "Go home, child." But home was gone, sold, like her name, so she stayed. Breathing in the smell of snow and old cedar, whispering half a prayer that no one answered. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of smoke and pine from the mountain trail, and with it came footsteps, slow, heavy, deliberate, the kind that belonged to a man who moved with the land rather than against it. She didn't look up until the shadow covered her. When she did, it felt like standing at the base of the mountain itself. He was taller than anyone she'd ever seen, shoulders wide beneath a coat patched with age and travel, hair thick with frost, eyes the color of thawed earth. He said nothing at first, only watched her like a man trying to understand what kind of wound could make someone fold so small. "You'll freeze there," he said finally, voice low and rough, more statement than warning. She tried to speak, but her throat caught on the cold. "No one wants me inside," she managed, the words breaking. He crouched, the boards beneath him creaking, his breath fogging the air between them. Then maybe inside's the wrong place. He slipped off one glove, reached into his coat, and pulled out a piece of dry bread wrapped in cloth. "Eat," he said simply. She stared at it, then at him, suspicion flickering where hope had died. "Why?" He looked toward the church door, then back at her. "Because somebody should." She took it, hands shaking, and the smell hit her, a reminder of warmth she'd forgotten. He waited until she ate a piece, then stood, towering above her again. "You got a name?" he asked. "Clara," she whispered. "Clara May." "I'm Elias," he said. "You can stand now." He offered his hand, massive and scarred, palm open like an invitation. She hesitated, then took it, the contrast startling, her fingers swallowed by his, but held so gently it felt like safety pretending to be strength. He lifted her as if she weighed nothing, like she'd been made of light instead of pain. For the first time in months, she didn't flinch at touch. The church bell above them shuddered once more, one last sound before silence, and snow began to fall again, soft flakes catching in her hair. He looked down at her, then up at the locked door, then toward the mountain beyond the town. "You coming?" he asked. She blinked, uncertain. "Where?" "Somewhere the doors stay open," he said. She nodded, almost without meaning to, and followed as he turned away from the church, his stride slow enough that her smaller steps could keep up. Behind them, the light from the chapel window dimmed, and ahead of them, the snow reflected the moon like forgiveness trying to find its way back to earth. The road out of town was a ribbon of frozen mud and moonlight, winding past the rail tracks and the sleeping freight wagons, then into the open white of the prairie. The only sound was the steady rhythm of Elias's boots, heavy enough to make the boards complain, and the softer scuff of Clara's steps behind him. She kept her shawl tight, breath turning to fog, eyes fixed on the ground as if afraid the world might vanish if she looked too far ahead. He didn't speak for a long time, and she was grateful. Silence, for once, felt like mercy instead of punishment. When they reached the edge of the valley, he stopped beside a split-rail fence, one hand resting on the post, while his other offered her a moment to catch her breath. "You got far to go?" he asked finally. She shook her head. "No home left, just debts and whispers." He nodded once. The kind of nod a man gives when he knows there's nothing more to say. "Then you're walking the right direction." She looked up, confusion flickering behind exhaustion. "Why help me?" His gaze stayed on the mountains, black against the star field. "Because I've seen what happens when no one does." The wind picked up, slipping between them, carrying the faint sound of the church bell fading in the distance. "They'll talk," she said after a moment. "Let 'em," he replied. "Words can't chase past snow." She studied him quietly. There was a steadiness in his walk, a kind of patience she'd never seen in men who called themselves righteous. The town had been full of men who prayed with one hand and struck with the other. This one prayed, if he prayed at all, by building fires and carrying others through storms. When she stumbled, her foot catching a frozen rut, he turned and steadied her without thinking, his hand around her arm, firm but careful. "Careful," he murmured. "The road's mean." "I'm used to mean," she said, trying to sound brave, but the words broke halfway. He looked down at her, a faint, knowing sadness in his face. "Doesn't mean you deserve it." She blinked, caught off guard by the simplicity of it, and for a moment couldn't find an answer. They walked again, the snow thickening, the stars dimming behind the rising clouds. After a while she asked, "You live up there?" He nodded toward the ridge ahead. "Cabin near the timberline. Built it when I got tired of listening to men who think they're God." "And you'll take me there?" she asked softly. "If you'll walk," he said. "If you'll rest when I tell you." She smiled faintly. "You sound like you give orders." "Only when the mountain's listening," he said. That almost made her laugh, though it came out small and unsure. They passed a dead tree, its branches reaching up like bones against the sky. "You married?" she asked suddenly, the question half reflex, half curiosity. He hesitated, eyes still forward. "Was," he said. "She's part of the mountain now." "I'm sorry," Clara whispered. "Don't be," he said. "She'd tell me I still talk too much." He glanced down, saw the question forming on her lips, and added, "And you?" She looked away. "They said I wasn't fit for marriage." "Then they weren't fit to say it." They climbed in silence after that, breath sinking, steps matching, the wind easing as if the mountain had chosen to listen. When the first faint light of dawn touched the ridge, the cabin appeared through the pines, small, smoke-dark, and waiting. Elias stopped, turned back to her, and said quietly, "You made it this far. That means you keep walking." She nodded, tears catching the light, and together they stepped toward the promise of fire. The cabin stood like a held breath among the trees, its chimney leaning slightly, a faint curl of smoke still whispering from the night before. Elias pushed open the door with the slow care of a man who never forgot how thin wood could sound in silence. Inside was warmth, not plenty, but honest warmth, the kind that lives close to the floor where the fire keeps its promise. He stepped aside for her to enter first. Clara hesitated on the threshold, her hands clutching the shawl, eyes darting to the corners as if expecting someone else to claim the space. "Ain't much," he said, voice low, "but it keeps the wind out." She stepped in, and the air changed. Her shiver eased just a little as the scent of smoke and pine replaced the memory of cold stone and church walls. He stoked the fire until it breathed steady, the flames licking the iron grate, light flickering across his broad shoulders. "Sit," he said. "You look like you've been standing since yesterday." She obeyed, lowering herself onto the small bench by the hearth. The fire's glow caught her face, and for the first time he saw the fine bruises that told the rest of the story. One's words hadn't carried. He said nothing, only moved to hang his coat near the door. "You want tea?" he asked after a moment. "Got some dried mint somewhere?" "Yes, please," she whispered, though it sounded strange to hear her own voice ask for something gentle. He found the tin, poured a handful into a tin cup, and filled it from the kettle. The steam rose between them, turning the air soft, alive. "Was it the preacher's men?" he asked. She looked up sharply, eyes wide. "You know? I know the way shame walks," he said. "I seen it follow too many women down church steps." Her eyes glistened, but she didn't cry again. "They said I was temptation," she whispered. "Said I was born to ruin men." "Funny," he said, his tone steady. "Seems to me men ruin themselves just fine." The silence after that felt cleaner. She sipped the tea, warmth spreading slow through her chest. He watched her hands steady, her breath deepen. Then he moved to a small shelf near the window, reached up, and brought down a single feather, long, white-tipped, weathered at the base. He turned it once between his fingers before holding it out to her. "You know what this is?" She shook her head. "It's from a golden eagle," he said. "Found it last spring. They say it means protection, but I keep it to remind me that even something that soars starts by falling." She took it carefully, her fingers trembling. "It's beautiful," she said. "Then it belongs to you," he replied. Why? Because you need to remember the sky's still yours. The words landed soft but heavy. She stared at the feather, light catching in its barbs, gold and white flashing like new hope. You don't even know me, she said. I know enough, he answered. The fire popped, sending up a spark that drifted toward the chimney and vanished. She looked at him then, not at the size of him or the scars, but at the calm beneath them. You don't talk like the others, she said. Maybe I don't think like them either. He poured another cup of tea, handed it to her, then sat on the floor beside the hearth, his back against the wall. Outside, the snow fell slow and quiet, as if the mountain itself were blessing what the town had cursed. And inside, for the first time in a long time, neither of them felt alone. By nightfall, the wind came down from the ridge like a living thing, rattling the shutters and howling through the chimney until it sounded like the mountain was remembering old griefs. Elias set a wooden brace against the door, then threw another log onto the fire. Sparks rose, orange and defiant, pushing back the cold that pressed its face against the glass. Clara sat wrapped in a quilt near the hearth, her knees drawn up, the feather still clutched in her hands. The light from the flames turned her hair copper at the edges, soft against her cheeks. Does it always sound like this? She asked, voice barely louder than the storm. Always, he said. Mountain don't mean harm, it just speaks loud. She smiled faintly, the kind that doesn't last but wants to. Feels like it's angry. Maybe it is, he said. Everything's angry when it's misunderstood. She looked into the fire. Her reflection wavered there, one side bright, one side lost in shadow. Back there before the church, they said I brought this on myself. They lied, he said without looking at her. People who build their worth on guilt always need someone to bleed for it. Her throat tightened. You talk like a preacher, but you don't sound like one. He gave a small laugh, low and broken around the edges. Had a father who was one. Learned early that not all sermons come from pulpits. She studied him, the way his face softened when he spoke, the line of tired peace etched deep near his eyes. He hurt you? She asked. He taught me faith, Elias said, but not kindness. I had to find that myself. And did you? Working on it. The fire cracked between them. A sound like bones snapping, then sighing. She hesitated, then spoke again. When they threw me out, I didn't cry for God. I cried for being seen. Just once. He turned toward her then, really looked at her. You're seen now, he said. She shook her head, tears sliding silent down her cheeks. You don't know what they did. You don't have to tell me. I want to, she said, the words trembling, so it doesn't keep growing. The storm outside roared, and she spoke over it, halting, shaking, telling him about the night the preacher's son came drunk from the tavern, about the lies that followed, about the whispers that turned to stones. The door slammed in her face, the word temptation hurled like a curse. Elias didn't move, didn't interrupt, didn't pity. He just listened, and the listening itself became its own kind of mercy. When she finished, the wind outside began to ease, as if the mountain too had heard enough. That's why I was on those steps, she said finally, voice raw. I thought maybe if I begged long enough, he'd open the door. He did, Elias said. You just didn't know he looked like this. She let out a broken laugh that turned into a sob, covering her mouth with her hand. Elias rose, crossed the small space between them, and knelt beside her. He didn't touch her, not yet, but his presence filled the room like a shield. You ain't what they said, he whispered. You never were. She looked up at him through tears, saw the truth there, simple and solid as the mountain. He reached out then, slow, steady, and brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. Storm's passing, he said. You'll see. And outside, as if it had been waiting for his words, the wind began to rest, leaving only the sound of snow melting against the window and the steady, forgiving breath of fire. The morning after the storm broke clean and silent, the kind of quiet that feels like a reward more than an absence. The sky had turned pale blue, and frost clung to the trees like lace, each branch traced in white fire by the sun. Inside the cabin, the air smelled of wood smoke and thawing earth. Elias had been up before light, splitting kindling outside, his breath rising in clouds that drifted like memory. When Clara stirred, She found him by the window, steam curling from a tin cup in his hands. For a long time she didn't speak, just watched him. How a man so large could move with such care, how his shoulders eased like the mountain itself had finally let go of something heavy. "You don't sleep much," she said softly. He turned, half smiling. "Sleep's for men without ghosts." "And you have ghosts?" "Everyone who's lost something worth keeping does." She pulled the blanket closer around her, eyes drifting to the feather resting on the table, catching sunlight through the cracks in the shutters. "I dreamed of the church," she said, "but it wasn't cold. There was music. I think it was the same bell, only softer." "Dreams rewrite what we survive," he said. "Let 'em." He crossed the room, poured her tea from the kettle, and handed her the cup. "You need food," he added. "You'll find I'm not much of a cook." "I don't mind," she said, taking the cup, letting her fingers brush his. The warmth made her throat ache. It reminded her of what it felt like to be alive and safe in the same moment. They sat at the small table near the hearth, the fire whispering low. "You ever go back?" she asked after a while. "To the town? To people?" He thought about that, eyes following the slow curl of smoke. "I tried once. Didn't fit right. Some men are built for walls, some for wind." She smiled faintly. "And what about women?" "Women carry both," he said. "They build homes out of what the wind leaves behind." Her eyes softened. "You sound like you know." "I've seen enough to learn." Silence again, comfortable this time. She looked out the window, at the light spilling across the snow. "It's beautiful here," she said, "the kind of beauty that doesn't ask to be looked at." "That's the best kind," he said. She studied him quietly, the way his hands wrapped around his cup, the way his voice filled the air without taking space from it. "Elias," she said suddenly, "why didn't you leave me there? You didn't owe me anything." He met her eyes, steady, calm. "A man don't need to owe what's right." She blinked hard, fighting the sting of tears. "And if they come for me, then they'll find a door that don't open easy. They'll call you a sinner for it." He gave a slow smile. "Let them. I've been called worse for less." She laughed quietly, the sound fragile but real, and the cabin seemed to breathe with her. Outside, the snow began to slide from the roof, landing soft against the ground, and a raven cried somewhere in the trees, a single note, clean and final. She looked toward the sound, then back at him. "You think God forgives?" she asked. "If he didn't," Elias said, "we'd never wake to mornings like this." She nodded, and for the first time in too long, the quiet between them wasn't filled with fear but with faith finding its way home. By late afternoon, the calm began to shift, a new wind curling through the pines that didn't belong to the mountain. Elias noticed first, the way the mare tethered outside lifted her head, ears flicking toward the valley. He set down the axe, wiped the sweat from his brow, and listened. The rhythm came faint but certain, 3 horses, maybe 4, moving at a pace that meant business. Clara saw the change in his face before she heard it. "What is it?" she asked from the doorway. "Visitors," he said. "The kind that don't knock." Her hands tightened around the shawl at her shoulders. "They found us?" "They found something worth finding," he said, calm but already reaching for his coat. "Stay inside." She shook her head, stepping closer to him. "You can't face them alone." "Ain't about alone," he said. "It's about peace." He walked to the fire, took the feather from the mantle, and tucked it into the inside of his coat. Peace don't always mean quiet. By the time the riders came into view, the sun had fallen low behind the ridge, the light bleeding gold through the trees. 3 of them, just as he'd guessed, one with a badge, the others with guns and the kind of smirks men wear when they think the law's on their side. The sheriff raised a hand, his breath clouding the cold. "Elias," he called, "you've got something that belongs to the town." Elias stood at the edge of the porch, unarmed, coat open to show he meant no fight. "Ain't nothing in this cabin that belongs to cruelty," he said. The sheriff shifted in his saddle. "Girls wanted for questioning. Pastor swore an oath." "Pastor swears plenty," Elias said. "Oaths don't turn lies true." The deputy spat into the snow. "You think you can hide her forever?" Elias's eyes were steady. "Not hiding, healing," the sheriff's jaw clenched. "That's not your place." Then maybe it's yours, Elias said quietly. And maybe you forgot what it means. The men looked at each other, uncertain now, as if his calm unsettled them more than any weapon could. Clara watched from the doorway, fear and faith warring behind her eyes. She can speak for herself, Elias said. He turned, motioning gently for her to step forward. Clara came out slow, the blanket still around her shoulders, the firelight behind her casting her face in gold. You think I ran, she said to the sheriff. I didn't. I was thrown out. The deputy snorted. You expect anyone to believe? I don't care what you believe, she said, voice rising steady. You all saw him that night. You heard him. You knew. Her words hung in the cold like embers refusing to die. The sheriff's gaze dropped. Something in him shifted. A memory maybe, or guilt finding its way through the cracks. That true? One of the riders muttered. The sheriff didn't answer. Elias stepped beside her, his shadow folding into hers. You done hearing yet? He asked. The sheriff looked up, eyes tired, and after a long moment he nodded once. We're done, he said. He turned his horse, the others following, their tracks marking the snow like pennants. When the sound of hooves faded, Clara let out a trembling breath and leaned against the post. Elias looked down at her, the tension leaving his shoulders slow as melting ice. You stood tall, he said. You didn't need saving this time. She smiled weakly, tears bright in the fading light. Maybe I did once, she whispered, but not anymore. The wind shifted again, gentle now, carrying the sound of their leaving into the trees, and the mountain, listening, stayed quiet in agreement. That night the fire burned lower than before, a soft pulse of orange against the dark, the kind that breathes slow when the world has earned its rest. Elias sat by the hearth sharpening a blade that didn't need it, the scrape of metal against stone marking time, while Clara watched from the small bench near the door, her shawl pulled close, but her heart open wider than it had been in years. Neither spoke for a long while, the silence between them no longer awkward, but full, like a conversation the soul was still learning how to say out loud. Finally she broke it. You could have shot them, she said quietly. Would have been easier. Easier don't mean better, he answered, eyes fixed on the knife. Men die easy. Living right's harder. She nodded slowly, the firelight painting her face in gold and shadow. I used to think strength was loud, she said, all shouting and fists. Now I think maybe it's quiet. Quiet's the hardest kind, he said. He set the blade aside, leaned forward, elbows on his knees. When my wife was alive, she'd tell me peace ain't found. It's made, one breath at a time. I didn't listen much back then. Clara studied him, the way his words seemed carved more than spoken. What happened to her? Fever took her, he said. I buried her up the ridge where the birches turn silver in winter. She always said that's where heaven brushes earth. He looked into the fire, voice softer now. Some nights I still talk to her, though I ain't sure who's listening. Maybe she is, Clara said. Maybe she sent you back to the church steps. He glanced up, caught her eyes. And for a moment the air felt too small for all that was inside it. Maybe she did, he said. The fire crackled, one log settling with a sigh. Clara reached forward, fingers trembling, and placed the feather he'd given her on the mantel above the flame. For her, she said. He looked at it, then at her. She'd like that. Another silence grew, tender as spring thaw. The cabin walls seemed to breathe with them. You ever think of leaving? She asked softly. Going back down? The mountain's got its grip on me, he said. Down there's noise and pretending. Up here everything means what it is. And what am I up here? She asked, not quite meeting his gaze. He took a breath that sounded like it hurt a little. You're proof that mercy can find its way through blizzards. The words caught her off guard. A tremor passing through her shoulders, she turned toward the window where the snow was falling again, slow and forgiving. I thought mercy was for the righteous, she whispered. Then the righteous don't need it, he said. She smiled faintly, a tear catching light before falling. You always know what to say. Only 'cause I spent years saying nothing. He leaned back, the chair creaking beneath his weight, and watched her as she stood and walked to the fire. She reached out her hands toward the flame, palms open, light flickering over her face. I don't feel cold anymore, she said. That's how you know you're healing, he said. Cold don't leave easy. You have to choose warmth. She turned to him, eyes bright, voice steady now. Then I'm choosing. He didn't move, didn't smile, just nodded once like a vow. The fire popped, throwing a spark that landed between them and faded without smoke. Outside, the wind pressed gentle against the walls, not trying to get in this time, just listening to two hearts remembering how to trust again. By morning the sky had changed again, pale and watchful, the kind that hides its storms behind sunlight. Elias knew before he opened the door that peace was ending. The air felt charged, the horses restless, the quiet too sharp. Down the ridge, smoke curled where there shouldn't have been any. He stepped outside, eyes narrowing. Clara followed him, clutching her shawl. "More men?" she asked. "Maybe," he said, "or maybe one with too much pride to stay gone." She looked at him, fear returning to the edges of her breath. "We can't fight them again." "Not this time," he said. "Sometimes standing's enough." He loaded his rifle slowly, checked the flint, then leaned it by the door instead of taking it. "If they come, I want them to see my hands empty." "Empty hands won't stop bullets," she whispered. "They might stop sin," he said. He moved to the porch, the light slanting across his face, gold and hard. Below the ridge, a single rider broke through the trees, the sheriff riding alone. His coat was torn, his eyes sunken from a night without peace. Elias waited, arms crossed, still as the land itself. When the man stopped 20 paces away, the horse snorted, stamping the snow. "You were right," the sheriff said finally. "The pastor's gone. Took the church money and half the town's faith with him." "That's what lies do," Elias said. "They travel lighter than truth." The sheriff nodded, staring at the ground. "They'll want someone to blame when they find out. They'll look for her." "Then they'll have to go through me," Elias said. The sheriff looked up, something weary and human behind his eyes. "You'd do that for her." "For what's right," Elias said. "She deserves to live without running." The man dismounted, removed his hat and set it in the snow. "You think I don't know what that feels like?" he asked. "I was her age when I first broke the law to keep a man alive." Elias studied him, the cold between them not cruel anymore, just clean. "Then maybe you remember what redemption costs." "Everything," the sheriff said quietly. "But it's the only thing worth paying." He reached into his coat and pulled out the folded wanted notice, edges damp, ink fading. He dropped it into the snow between them, where the sunlight hit, melting it slow until the words ran and disappeared. "No one's coming for her now," he said. "Or for you." Elias nodded once. "Then we're done?" "No," the sheriff said. "You'll still be judged, but maybe this time by someone who knows mercy." He turned, mounted again, and rode back toward the valley. When the sound of hooves faded, Clara stepped out beside Elias, watching the path the man had taken. "He let us go," she said softly. "No," Elias said. "He set us free." She looked up at him, snowflakes catching in her hair. "You think people can change that much?" "Only when it hurts enough," he said, "and only when someone else shows them how." She smiled then, slow and real. "You think that's what we did?" He looked at her, the firelight from inside flickering on her face, and nodded. "I think that's what you did." The wind shifted, carrying the smell of pine and smoke again, gentler now, less warning and more blessing. The mountain behind them glowed with new snow, the ridge bright as forgiveness. Elias turned toward the cabin. "Come on," he said. "The day's cold, but it's ours." And together they walked inside, the door closing behind them on a world that had finally learned to breathe. When spring came to the ridge, it came all at once, like the mountain had been holding its breath all winter and finally exhaled. The snow slid from the peaks in shining sheets, the rivers swelled with meltwater, and the air filled with the scent of pine and wet soil. Elias stood by the riverbank, boots sunk into mud, watching the current carry shards of ice downstream. Beside him, Clara knelt at the edge, washing a small cloth in the water, her reflection trembling on the surface. She looked stronger now, color back in her face, hair tied with a strip of linen, sleeves rolled high as sunlight touched her arms. "It's strange," she said softly, "how the river remembers every storm and still keeps moving." "That's what it's for," Elias said, "to forget without lying." She smiled faintly, dipping the cloth again. "I used to think I'd never feel clean again." "Clean ain't the same as forgiven," he said. One you can wash, the other you have to live. She turned toward him, the water shining behind her like light made liquid. And you? You ever feel forgiven? He hesitated, then looked across the valley where the birches shimmered in the sun. Not yet, but I'm starting to think forgiveness isn't something you wait for. It's something you do. They stayed there a while, the sound of the river a heartbeat between them. A hawk circled overhead, slow and graceful, the same kind whose feathers still rested above the hearth. Clara wrung out the cloth, folded it, and rose, brushing the dirt from her skirt. You'll leave one day, she said. Men like you always do. Elias shook his head. Not all of us. Some just learn to stay put when they finally find something worth guarding. Her eyes softened. And what about me? You'll go when you're ready, he said, but not because you're chaste, because you're called. She stepped closer, close enough for him to see the light in her eyes, the kind that comes after too much darkness. You think there's a place for people like us? She asked. A place that won't shut its doors? He smiled, faint but certain. If there ain't, we'll build it. She looked down at the river again, then took a coin from her pocket, the same one the sheriff had dropped months ago when he rode away. For what was owed, she said quietly, tossing it into the water. The coin spun, caught sunlight, then vanished beneath the surface. You think it'll reach the sea? Everything forgiven does, he said. They started back toward the cabin, the ground soft under their steps, the mountain breathing easier with every gust of wind. Near the porch, she stopped and looked back once more at the river. Elias, she said, if I'd never met you, you would have found someone else kind, he said. Kindness always finds the broken ones. But maybe not in time, she whispered. Then I reckon time bent just enough, he said. Inside, the fire was burning again, steady and bright. She hung the wet cloth by the window, and the smell of clean water filled the air. He poured tea, handed her a cup, and for a moment neither spoke, just listened to the slow rhythm of life returning. Outside, the river kept its promise, carrying away what didn't need to be remembered. Clara reached across the table, laid her hand over his, and said, You were right, Elias. The sky's still mine. He looked at her, the fire reflected in his eyes, and said, Always was. And beyond the cabin walls, the world finally sounded like peace. The first real spring morning rose clear and gold over the ridge, sunlight spilling through the birches like liquid mercy, the air soft and new, as if the mountain itself had decided to forgive. Elias stepped outside, the earth damp beneath his boots, smoke curling from the chimney behind him. The world smelled alive again. Pine, soil, thawed river water, a hint of ash still clinging to his coat. Down by the cabin steps, Clara was hanging a clean quilt on the line, her sleeves rolled, hair glinting in the light. She hummed a tune he didn't know, something soft and half-forgotten, the kind of melody people only find when their hearts start to heal. He stood a moment watching her, the wind lifting the edge of the quilt so it fluttered like a flag of peace. When she turned, she smiled, and that was all it took for the silence between them to feel like home. You're quiet, she said. Morning deserves it, he answered. She laughed, and it was light, not nervous, not broken, just alive. I had another dream, she said. I was back on those church steps. Only this time no one turned away. The door was open. Maybe that's 'cause you finally stopped asking permission to walk through, he said. She nodded, eyes wet but bright. I think I did. He moved closer, the light warming his face, and reached up to tighten the quilt on the line. You staying? He asked, quiet but steady. She met his gaze, the air between them thick with the kind of truth that doesn't need more words. If you'll have me, she said. I ain't ever turned away what was meant to stay, he replied. She stepped forward, her hand brushing his chest, fingers tracing the edge of the feather still tied to his coat. You kept it, she whispered. Wasn't mine to lose, he said. The river below sang louder now, swollen with meltwater, and a hawk circled overhead, its cry cutting through the morning clean as a vow. Elias looked toward it, then back at her. Funny thing about mercy, he said. It don't end where it starts. She smiled, eyes shining with something more than gratitude. What does it end with? Belonging, he said simply. She reached for his hand, small against his, and together they walked toward the porch. Inside, the cabin glowed in the slant of morning light, dust motes drifting like tiny prayers. The carving over the hearth caught the sun, M.H., the letters he'd made for a memory, and below them the word mercy, now glowing like gold. Clara touched it gently. "It's beautiful," she said. "It's ours," he corrected. She turned, looking around the room, the kettle on the stove, the feather by the window, his coat hanging by the door, and for the first time she saw not a refuge, but a life. He poured tea, handed her a cup, and when their fingers met, the warmth passed between them like a promise. Outside, the wind carried the scent of wildflowers from the valley, and the mountain watched in silence, proud and patient. She took a sip, then looked at him over the rim of the cup. "You ever think you'd find peace again?" she asked. He smiled faintly, eyes soft. "Didn't find it," he said. "Built it." They sat by the fire, and for the first time since the church steps, she didn't feel like a woman rescued. She felt like a woman home. If this story stirred your heart, don't let it fade with the last line. Leave a like, share it with someone who still believes in second chances, and subscribe to Redemption West, where the West is harsh, but redemption is real, and mercy always finds its home.